Nelson, wherever you look, skin, skin, skin. Spring break in Fort Lauderdale. 250,000 kids here for the sole purpose of partying.
Nelson Dalby and Adam Stern are about to get the break of their lives. Spring break. For some, it's the start of a whole new education.
Hi, sweetie.
What? Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Don't you think you're sexy?
Oh, my God!
For others, it's a more advanced course. You can learn a foreign language.
Buenos dias.
Or expand your present one.
Son of a...
You can learn martial arts. Home economics.
Sonny dies for your protection.
Culinary arts. And all sorts of sports. There's something for those into the performing arts. And something for those into nature.
Oh, Nelson.
Columbia Pictures presents Spring Break. It's the reason kids go to college in the first place.
I still don't know where my underpants are.
Why, what happened to him?
I think they ate them.
Hey YouTubers, Hankster here, and welcome to another movie review. And this is going to be sort of a small series of movie reviews tied to this particular part of the year called Spring Break. This is basically a week-long time where students take some time off from their classes and just go a bit crazy. And first of these series of movies tied to the college life and spring break and such is the self-entitled movie Spring Break. And this, of course, this movie originally came out in 1983, so this movie's over 30 years old, about 31 years old now. And the cast include David Nell, Perry Lang, Paul Land, Steve Bassett, Jane Modine, Daniel Faraldo, Donald Singleton, Jessica James, Richard B. Shull, and Penthouse Pet of the Year for 1982, Corinne Alphen. This, of course, was the typical screwball level college spring break movie. A lot of movies of kind of sort of a series of, not exactly a series, they weren't all totally connected, but there was a lot of spring break or party movies, teenager / college movies that came out in the early 80s. And this was not the only, this was basically one of the highest grossing college movies of all time 30 years ago. I think there was also, around this time also, there was a remake of the 1960s movie Spring Break done for the 80s. It was called Spring Break 1984, which basically ran around the same plot, even though it was more edgy and more sex-driven and stuff like that, for the 80s. Of course, that was supposed to be 20 years after the original one, but, Also, this movie was directed by the director from the original Friday the 13th, so that's pretty interesting. Now, also have to note that the female leads in this movie, even though there's a lot of nudity in this movie, the female leads in this movie aren't naked. Oddly enough, even Corinne Alphen, who, of course, posed nude in Penthouse and became a Penthouse pet, and, of course, if you know how raunchy they get, she wasn't naked anyway. She was very sexy in the movie, but she wasn't naked, sadly to say. But there was a lot of TNA still dressed, but it was kind of like a big, fan service movie, live-action fan service movie, if you want to equivalent that. Now, of course, the plot of the movie, yes, there is a plot, basically surrounds these two young dudes named Nelson and Adam. They go to Fort Lauderdale. Of course, over 30 years old, in the 1980s, the big place to go in spring break for college students was Fort Lauderdale. Also Daytona. But this movie takes place in Fort Lauderdale, and they decide to take their chances and try to have some fun. But, of course, we find out that Nelson is the stepson of an up-and-coming senator who basically cares only about his chances for winning the Senate rather than the well-being of his son. He basically only uses his son and family to, prop up his campaign, obviously. And he doesn't look too kindly to his son running off to Fort Lauderdale and making an ass of himself. Of course, these guys get some reservations. They get themselves a room. But, of course, there was one big pitfall. Their room was also reserved for two other guys. And these two guys were CJ and Stu. These were two wacky guys. But instead of causing a big fight between the three, they decided to team up and take on the fun activities of spring break, including, of course, belly flopping, beer drinking, and the wet t-shirt contest. And for you girls out there who might get offended by this, they even had a scene where the guys even took part in wet t-shirts, where the men were the contestants. Yes, not just the women were taking part of this, but also the women. Now, of course, CT was basically the more risk taker. He was the one who was doing most of the belly flops and everything, and he was the one who fell for Corrine Alphen's character in the movie. So that was pretty interesting. Now, meanwhile, of course, Nelson, trying to keep himself under the radar, winds up getting himself photographed in a newspaper where his stepfather reads, and of course, arrives to Fort Lauderdale to retrieve him along with his goons. Now, of course, more trouble brews up when his stepfather gets in line with a sleazy realtor guy who basically has his sights on the very hotel that Nelson and the gang are staying at. And the female owner of the place is having trouble getting the money together for spring break, and he wants to buy the place under her. And basically he is hired by the senator to try to get his son back, and of course that will basically blow up in his face later on. Now, of course, meanwhile, Nelson has fallen for a young beauty named Susie, who he has some interesting run-ins. And the first time they try to hook up in her hotel room, but it winds up he gets lost while trying to get a drink, and gets thrown out. And he didn't even find out her name until he luckily caught her at a beauty contest. He, of course, almost lost his other chance when he had to go take a piss out in the woods and an alligator tried to eat his pants. But, of course, he wins her over and all. Of course, hot on his heels is his stepfather's goons who, of course, capture him and pretty much not only hold him on his stepfather's yacht, but also try to take over the hotel. But, of course, will the gang save the day and save not only just Nelson, but also their hotel as well? We'll just have to watch this movie. It's pretty wacky, not just the major plot line, but also the crazy contests and all. It basically takes you back to a more fun-filled era where people just had a lot of fun and didn't have to complain and didn't have to put up with people complaining about things. It is pretty much one of my favorite. This is, of course, I just recently watched it. It's the first time I've watched it in a long time. It was basically one of those shows you catch on late night on Cinemax or HBO when it finally came on in cable back in the 80s. But it's pretty much one of the classic movies. Of course, as I said, there is a lot of nudity. It's female nudity. Who wants to see naked guys anyway? And all, but I do suggest to catch this. It's it's up there with if we want to see a more recent connection, maybe the American Pie movies, stuff like that. But you're into hot chicks, crazy antics, parties, and even crazy competitions, check this movie out. It gives you a taste of what spring break was back in the day, and this was, hey, when I was just a teenager watching these movies back then, I wanted to get involved with it. Of course, by the time I got in college in the 90s, that kind of thing kind of died down. Too bad, so sad. But just check this out. If you're not able to actually go to, I think these days kids go to Cancun or something for spring break. But you want to get an idea what the crazy antics of spring break is, at least 30 years ago, at least 31 years ago. Check out Spring Break, the movie. And, of course, it's out on DVD. I don't think it's out on Blu-ray. But keep an eye out for it. And, of course, stay tuned here for more Spring Break movie reviews and whatnot here on the Multiverse. See ya.